Hi, my name is Madeline Lowry, and I'm a third-year rehabilitation medicine major.
Hi, I'm Erica Raymore, and I'm a third-year exercise science major and psychology minor.
Today, we're going to be talking about burnout in the work context and what all it entails. Burnout is described as a psychological syndrome characterized by emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and decreased personal accomplishment. Emotional exhaustion is characterized by feelings of overwhelming exhaustion from work. Depersonalization is characterized by cynicism and detachment from the workplace. When this work entails helping others, this means becoming cynical towards others, such as patients or clients. Decreased personal accomplishment is feelings of ineffectiveness at work, and these symptoms have become increasingly common in athletic trainers. For an athletic trainer, common contributors to burnout include role strain, work-family conflict, and challenges with professional socialization. Burnout then has a negative impact on athletic trainers' psychological well-being. Those with higher levels of burnout also reported headaches, high blood pressure, weight concerns, indigestion, fatigue, and sleeplessness. In addition, they also reported higher levels of depression and irritability. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, many individuals have experienced changes in the way they work, be it working from home, changes in responsibilities, or decreased interactions with others, and an AT is no exception to this rule. By April 2020, 14.8% of Americans were unemployed, according to the Congressional Research Service in 2021, with the state of Michigan peaked above that during that time. However, unemployment in areas such as education and healthcare rose significantly less than other jobs since they were considered essential. Another aspect of jobs that changed was many healthcare facilities had temperature checks and screenings completed prior to a visit. This means that when an AT was back in the clinic with patients, they would assume many of these administrative responsibilities. In addition to their job responsibilities, COVID also had an impact on mental health, and key features of burnout would have significant implications on an individual's mental health. The purpose of this study is twofold. First, to establish how COVID-19 has impacted athletic trainers' job responsibilities, and second, to determine if burnout predicts psychological well-being in these athletic trainers.
To understand how athletic trainers were impacted by COVID-19, we needed to recruit ATs for this study. Participants were obtained by sending informational emails to athletic training facilities and various social media accounts held by the kinesiology department at SVSU and Jacksonville State University. To be included in the study, participants had to be between the ages of 20 and 60 years old. This inclusion criteria was set because ATs must have a bachelor's and now master's degree, meaning they will have graduated and will likely be 20 years or older. Additionally, after the age of 60, we see changes in exercise among individuals. Lastly, participants had to be currently practicing as a certified athletic trainer. Data collection was completed through two surveys: Maslow Burnout Inventory and Satisfaction with Life Scale, both of which are subjective measures. Maslow Burnout Inventory was used to measure burnout levels in three areas of work context: exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. Satisfaction with Life Scale was used to measure perceived psychological well-being. To gain additional information, the participants were also given a demographic questionnaire. This included age, sex, ethnicity, years working as an AT, location of work, average hours per week spent working prior to COVID-19, current average hours per week spent working, and information about changes to their work tasks, responsibility, and environment due to the pandemic. Once all participants were recruited and able to fill out the surveys and questionnaire, we were able to calculate mean values regarding age and work hours relative to COVID. Keep in mind, not all participants answered each question, therefore the sample number varies for each question. Out of the 135 participants, 94 were accounted for, with majority of the participants being female. The mean age for the participants is 29 years old with a standard deviation of 5.5 years. The average years working as a certified athletic trainer is 6.6 with a standard deviation of 5 years. Here, it's important to note the highest recorded amount of years worked as a certified athletic trainer is 31 years and the lowest is 1 year. Majority of the ATs that recorded their primary location worked at a high school. Before COVID, participants estimated their average hours worked per week. We calculated the average amount to be a little over 40 hours, give or take 20 hours. Participants estimated their average hours worked per month during the pandemic. We calculated the average amount to be 12.3 hours, give or take 10.9 hours.
The relationship between COVID's impact on athletic trainers' job responsibilities was numerous in quantity. Of our 94 respondents, 83% reported that they experienced changes in job-related tasks. The most common responses included decreased clinical hours with patients and increased administrative responsibilities. Many of the responsibilities included completing daily temperature checks for athletes, daily COVID screenings, tracking their athletes' quarantines, and creating a return to play protocol for their athletes.
Now let's discuss the statistical results. To analyze the relationship between perceived burnout and well-being, a simple linear regression was conducted. The overall test was found to be significant, which indicates that findings are correlated. We examined the effect of burnout on well-being, which shows to be a negative effect indicated by the beta coefficient, which equals negative 0.64. This indicates that there is a negative relationship between the two variables. In other words, if an athletic trainer's perceived burnout increases, then their well-being will decrease. Or if burnout decreases, then their perceived well-being will increase in an AT. The R-squared value was 0.40, indicating that burnout explains 40% of the variance in well-being, which is a moderate effect size. Overall, we have found that perceptions of burnout are linked to well-being, whereby greater perceptions of burnout are linked to lower perceptions of well-being. We also found that the increase in job demands due to COVID is likely adding stress, which impacts the feeling of burnout. Essentially, COVID has an indirect impact on practicing athletic trainers' well-being. These findings can be used to educate athletic trainers that preventing burnout is essential for maintaining well-being. Some ways that athletic trainers can actively prevent burnout include learning to say no to a job, finding ways to relieve stress, for example, doing a workout, reading a book, going for a walk, or meditating. Keep work and home life separate. Avoid working from home as much as you can. Instead, take the time to decompress and visit with your family while you're at home. Keep work and social life separate. If you have friends that are also coworkers, try to avoid talking about work when you're not at work. The last suggestion is remembering your purpose. Remember why you wanted to be an athletic trainer. This may help keep you motivated in your work despite the current changes due to the pandemic. These are merely suggestions that may help minimize the feelings of burnout by trying to promote a healthy balance between work and home life.
We want to thank SVSU sponsored research programs for funding this research. We would also like to thank Drs. Paskowitz and Rowley for their guidance in this project. And finally, thank you to you for listening into our presentation today, and we look forward to seeing you in our Q&A session.
Everyone, thank you for joining our live. We hope you enjoyed our research presentation that we conducted with Dr. Paskowitz and Dr. Rowley. I'm Eric Raymore. I'm studying exercise science and minoring in psychology.
And my name is Madeline Lowry, and I'm studying rehabilitation medicine.
So if you have any questions, start asking them in the YouTube chat, and we will be able to answer them as we go through. Were you able to compare burnout rates of athletic training to other groups? So for this project, no. Right, Maddie, you want to back me up?
Yeah, so the only people a part of our population were all athletic trainers that are currently practicing, so we didn't evaluate any other like populations or careers.
Dr. Pasquid said great work, and Brian also said nice presentation, so thank you.
Yes, thank you guys.
We could also answer if there were any challenges that we faced during this research project slash presentation. And honestly, I don't think there were. The hardest part for me was
figuring out SPSS and like how to analyze.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Yeah. Okay, so did you find any differences between genders? So we did not run an analysis on that, but I feel there might be if we did. However, we didn't run an analysis on that.
That would have been a good one to run.
So say this one within literature reviews. I'm trying to think because we did some research on like nurses and doctors, and I'm trying to think of what the rates were in those populations. And I want to say they seemed relatively similar from what I remember reading, but I don't want to quote anything on that because I don't have anything open.
What are your next steps for the project? I mean, I think, I don't know if, do they want to take it further? I and Dr. Rowley planned on it.
No, I know they're still collecting more data on it. So like we got like a set of data like from it, and I believe there was more data being added to it after we like took our data and started analyzing it. So I think they're still collecting data to get like a greater population or sample size.
Overall, I'd say I had a lot of fun conducting this with Maddie. It went really well. I thought we worked well together.
Yes, we spent a lot of hours on Teams meetings working through everything. Yeah. This was just like an awesome experience overall, getting to learn how to use like the research process and using like the technology to analyze the data, which is something like I had never done before.
Right, yeah. So if you're a student viewing on this live session, I speak for myself, but I think Maddie would agree that if you're even considering it, we highly suggest joining a research group or seeing if you can, because it's a lot of fun and you learn a lot, and it just,
yes, it's a good experience. So what future directions, thinking about your results, there was one thing that we were talking about, I remember when we were analyzing our data, and it was the relationship between the presence of burnout. No. What was it? I think it had something to do with like how many hours like athletic trainers were working compared to like burnout, maybe was what it was. But I think those are like analyses that we can run on the data we currently have. There was something else that we were talking about, and now I'm blanking on what it was. Do you remember?
I don't remember either. I do remember thinking how like the amount of hours ATs work.
Yes,
that was actually insane.
Shocking. Many of them were like above like 40 hours, like on a routine basis.
Yeah.
Like many of them, I even saw like multiples that listed. They were like, yeah, I work 70 hours a week. Like, oh my God. Yeah. So seeing if that had like a relationship to their burnout.
I think there was something else that we were talking about, but I can't remember either.
I don't remember.
What are your plans after graduation? Has this project influenced those plans? Maddie, I'll let you talk first.
All right, so I'm graduating in December, and I would like to work in PT. So I'm hopefully going to be attending physical therapy, like a DPT program after I graduate. I'm not sure where I'm going yet. I'm still working on the application process. This project hasn't really influenced my plans per se, because this doesn't like specifically, like I'm not going into doing something with sports psych. But it's something like I found really interesting, like the classes that I've taken here. So it's more of just like something I'm really interested in, and it's definitely going to be applicable to the populations that I work with as a physical therapist.
So, definitely. Because did you have a minor or no?
I used to have a minor in Spanish. I've like done 3/4 of a minor in Spanish.
Because I know a lot of PT students like to take psychology as their minor, and I think this, will definitely be helpful.
Yes.
As for me, I am graduating in May 2022, and I will be going to grad school for sports psych. So I had this plan before joining the research team, but I think it was just a win-win that I did join this team because I'm in the field that I want to be. So yeah, I'm excited.
I feel like my questions are showing up after yours because when you read that last question, it wasn't on my screen yet. Maybe it's just
It's still lagging pretty bad. Are there any other questions about the research? Maddie, did you have a favorite thing or a favorite duty for this research project?
Honestly, I really liked just doing like the reading and like reading through the articles. Like there were certain afternoons where like I would just sit down and read like loads of articles for like hours on end. And that was just like interesting reading, and it wasn't like reading for school. So it was like almost leisure reading, but like not quite. Because it was like a part of this like research project. So I was like definitely getting something out of it, but it also like wasn't required for school. But I really enjoyed that. Like I enjoyed reading through all of the articles and just like putting together like that literature review.
I think we like to be knowledgeable. Like we just like to know things, and I agree. I like to read. Well, I shouldn't say that in general. I like to read articles about sports psych, like stuff like this. Like I didn't mind it either. I'm not a big reader other than that.
Yeah, I usually don't enjoy reading, but like reading through like all of this stuff was just like interesting because the content of the reading was like something I was interested in. So it wasn't like, oh, I have to sit down and do this reading or do this assignment. Like it was something I was genuinely interested in and wanted to learn more about. So it was like, oh, I get to do this. Like I get to go sit down and do like my research reading this afternoon.
Right. Now, some of those articles are pretty long. Were you able to read them through like in one sitting, or did you take breaks?
I actually have like major issues just sitting down reading. So I use like the audio feature on most PDFs and will listen to them. So I can pretty much sit down and like read through the entire thing straight, but like listening to
That's smart. Like a podcast. I never thought of that. That is awesome.
I do that with all of my reading. I can't focus on reading, so I always like to listen to them. So yes, Dr. Passage just put in the comments was that this information is applicable across like many work domains, and that's like absolutely true because I want to work with pediatrics. So like being able to apply some of these like principles that we've learned in like through our research and like the classes that we took in sports psych, like I can apply that like even to like pediatrics and like PT, and depending on like what other populations I end up working with throughout my time in school as well.
I think more and more people are realizing like how important psychology is for like any, like she said, any work domain, especially since going through COVID.
All right. Thank you for coming to our presentation and for asking some questions. It was a great experience getting to present our research and getting to answer some questions today. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello everyone, this is going to be our demonstration of the MedServ medication cart administration and inventory control system. This system was reverse engineered from a pre-existing cart. It was being used in the School of Nursing for their nursing simulations, and this also could be substituted to be used actually in industry as a functional medication cart. So first, let me go ahead and start by welcoming everyone, and we're going to go ahead and log into our application as one of our administrative users. So Lena Gibson, we're going to assign the barcode right now. From here, when we log in, we're going to come to our patient records screen. Patient records screen is going to show all of the active patients that are currently admitted into the system. So it could be in a facility, because this could be on a wing, but basically it's going to show all the active patients. Now, the one thing about logging into the system is that we do want to make sure this is secure, because this is supposed to be a live log of the current physical representation of the cart and the way it's been dispensing the medications. So we are using sophisticated salt, peppering, and 256-bit hashing to encrypt our logins so that they are basically reputable, that we can say that this is the user that did these functions. From here, let me show you quickly the all patient screen. Again, we have the patient's MRN, which is our uniquely identifiable ID inside the system. However, each patient will have a different visit ID or patient ID that goes with every time that they visit the system, so they can track what happens every time that they are there. From here, we can go in and search a lot of our users. We have one that we've picked right now for you, which is Alyssa Maya Jones Prince. I can show you the information that is saved in the database. This is the MRN, date of birth, all of the practical demographics, the active prescriptions, which are none currently, and the dispensary history, which is also none. We also have some allergies listed in the system. The next thing I can show you is the My Patient screen. So this, as the active user logged into the system is Lena Gibson, you can go in and decide from the active patients list that we want to actually assign Alina the user Alyssa Jones Prince. So from here we simply assign, patient has been assigned, and now we go into My Patients. We see that one patient has been assigned, so it's very easily accessible to the same screen. So from here, the allergies are addressed in this way. We have some current allergies already added into the system. We also have a way you can add general allergy to the system. So Advil could be a possible allergy type. It really means ibuprofen, it is a medication. We can say the class, you can see it's been added appropriately. From inside the allergies medication, we can go back to the previous screen, which is that patient demographic information, which we can actually edit the patient. We'll show a little bit more detail now. The street address, the zip code, and then their first, middle, initial, and last name. We can change all these things, as well as their barcode, which would represent their barcode for their visit at this point. If they are discharged or readmitted, they will get a different barcode for the next visit. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and show you how we can configure our inventory inside our system. The inventory consists of multiple drawers. Now, some of these drawers are currently full. So as we see, we represent that they are full. They only have a certain number of dividers, and they have those bins that come from that divider basically are full. So for this one, we're actually going to go ahead and go into drawer number 11. From drawer number 11, we're going to add a medication. So as you see, it transfers drawer number 11. We're going to add the medication renicidin. This actually is contacted in the National Institute of Health's API that is what they call RxNav or RxNorm. So it found that there's one specific prescribable medication from renicidin, and that is the citric acid. You can see that their strength is represented here from the NIH. The schedule unfortunately didn't come from the NIH, so we don't know if it's a controlled or narcotic, but because we're kind of relying on the data either being complete or not. So because we can't rely on all the data to be actually filled in by the NIH's database, we do allow the user to change the schedule. In this case, 0 means it's not controlled and not narcotic. We're also going to have to fill in the type ourselves, because again, it did not come from NIH. So we have the type entered in. We have a barcode to be entered in, which is the barcode that would be actually on the bottle itself. The bottle itself has an expiration date. In this case, I'll type it in here. We also have a quantity. So we're going to add, of these solutions, we're going to add a total of 100 milliliters, and it's not personal patient medication. So when we save it, we show here that we're going to actually go ahead and save the medication to the database. The database then retrieves the interactions from the NIH again through a drug interaction API, which is a daily updated resource for all drug interactions and all prescribable medications from the National Institute of Health and worldwide. As we see here now, all interactions have been added, and it's opening the drawer that requires we said we were adding it to. Once it's added, closes the drawer, and we return back to the previous screen. Now, we see here again that the medication has been appropriately added to the bin in the drawer. From here, we're going to go ahead and move on to the pharmacy tab. The pharmacy is where we're actually going to enter the order that has already been entered into the MRN, the medical record. And basically that from here, this is simply a dispensing. So for our patient, Melissa Jones Prince, she's going to be prescribed the medication that we just, which was the citric acid. And then we're going to say that she's going to want approximately 66 milligrams. It's going to be ordered by our physician, Stella Baker, as a DO, every 4 hours. Or a prescription, the prescription medication order has been placed. This does rely somewhat on the accuracy of the information ordered by the nurse, because there are multiple medications being ordered multiple frequencies. This may not make sense for this particular medication. However, in general, the nurses will already have this and it will be double checked and verified in the medical record. You see patient medication clears in the pharmacy. We go ahead and go to our now dispensing process. So if we go back into our patients, my patients, and pick up again for our patient in question and dispense our medication, which is that, we can then say we're going to go ahead and dispense a quantity of 1. Now again, we're going to be double checking our allergies, and we see we do not have an allergy to this medication, the medication being the irrigation solution. From that case, we go ahead and dispense it. Again, it opens the drawer that it's located inside. Here in the cart, we then remove it and then close the drawer again, and we show that the order was successfully placed. So the next area we're going to talk about is the ad hoc dispense. An ad hoc order is something that's not a standing order or a repeating order in the system. It's a one-time deal that doesn't get ordered in the same exact way. So it's not always a stat order, but it is definitely a one-time order. So for this, in this case, we're actually going to do an ad hoc order of bacitracin for the patient, Abigail Alina, who has the following allergies. As we see, we're going to have 1 application, so we're going to go ahead and dispense that medication. Again, it shows that we are opening the drawer appropriate to that medication, and then we will go ahead and close the drawer and proceed forward. Next screen I want to show is the main functionality of the wasting. So wasting is typically performed again right after we dispense a medication. In this case, wasting would happen when we are dispensing a chewable tablet, but we also only need the 25 milligrams of this 50 milligram chewable tablet. So we can see where the drawer that's actually located in. We're actually going to waste the 25 milligrams of the single tablet. And the answer is that it is the surplus from the order that we're trying to execute. Here we have witness that signs off. Normally this will be handled by a barcode scan in, and then waste is recorded. And the screen clears, and we move forward. The other thing we want to talk about is the importing and exporting of the database or individual records. So we have built into the system where you can export the database, which is essentially saving a copy of the database to another file. We also have a way to import the database as a copy. So if we were to import the database, that you do not want to actually import the full database and edit it, but we also want to preserve the original file, we can import it as a copy. And the last, of course, is importing the database to actually edit the database file itself. The importing of the records would be if we're going to do bulk importing of various records. And this is done with a standard tab delimited text file. We'll go on to the user settings. There are multiple settings inside the system, including settings for adding or removing users, updating their barcodes, updating their passwords, and actually their first name and last name, as well as reassigning them to a new username. You can discharge and admit patients. You can add rooms and beds or delete existing rooms and beds. You have administrative functions, which, for example, we have simulation modes, so we can run the cart without actually attaching it to the application. We have the baud rate and the COM port for the way it communicates. We also have physician settings. The last functionality is logging out. Obviously, when we log out, typically the system is never actually closed. However, we do have an ability to close the system through here. Or if we were to log back in and don't have our ID card with us today, we can log in with a password, in which case we have a username and password assigned to every user as well as a barcode. I thank everyone for your time today. Really appreciate being able to present this to you, and we're very excited about the future of this application as well as other possible ways this application can be used. Thank you. All right, so I think one of the first questions we have to answer for each of us is what was the most difficult or challenging thing we had to tackle in making this project?
And I'll go first on that one. It was from the very beginning, we were like, how are we all going to be able to program in one program? And how is it all going to make sense? And we managed to somehow, as a group, come together and create a room where we can all hang out virtually and program together. And then we all got along so much better as a team. It caused the team to grow so much to where I sliced my left tendon on my ring finger. And the team completely took over, and they were amazing, and they were super understanding and able to take over for me and take over my workload. And it was so helpful for me, and it was an amazing team to be working with. Brianna?
For me, it would be just trying to make sure everyone was organized and everyone knew what was going on. I worked on the database, so my part was more like the back end stuff. My stuff had to be perfect in order for other people to work on it, on their stuff. So I had to make sure I communicated with everyone and that their stuff didn't break when I made a change and that they didn't break anything when they made a change. So I'd say communication and just making sure we weren't breaking other people's stuff was a challenge.
I would say my biggest struggle, I was on the documentation team, and one of the biggest challenges was trying to understand the system's functionality as a whole and critiquing it to the point where it could be understood by someone who's not tech savvy or somebody who's not in the nursing department. So having that challenge set before us was quite difficult.
Yeah, I would say the biggest struggle I had was learning something that I didn't necessarily learn through the schooling. I had learned a lot of the skills and how to research these kind of things with the web API for this project. A lot of that stuff wasn't exactly taught to me. So learning how to take the skills I've learned in university and applying it and being able to figure it out.
And then I'll say that one of the biggest things to start right from the get-go was taking the old cart that was in essence dying or not working properly anymore, and having to reverse engineer the communication between the computer and the drawers to figure out the firmware and just all the ways to make these things interact properly and work. And then also finding a good resource for those drug interactions. We think we did a lot of research to find out what was available. Because we knew wanted to have interactions, we wanted to have a way to have allergies, flag as well, so we're not, administering medicine that would basically be detrimental to the patient, and having the system itself flag that. So we thought that was one of the other biggest challenges, just trying to find where to get that. Luckily, we found this resource in the National Institute of Health that was. Well, it's free with a registration, so we got that. We had some just real good ways to solve it. I remember we spent hours and hours trying to figure out if we're going to be learning it locally, if we can do it on the internet, what our requirements were going to be for the system. So Dylan and Bree, what do you remember about that part?
For me, it was figuring out what aspect of the API that we were going to use for the interactions, because the way they have it set up is there's a bunch of different ways you could pull the same data, but the data wasn't always consistent. So we had to figure out which way was the best way for our system that would make the most sense and would also help the users, not hinder them in their workflow.
Yeah, I agree with what Bree said. A lot of the research and making sure that we're using the right technologies for everything, and then even using the documentation, even if we were using it right, not getting the results we were looking for. So
Yeah, no, we were trying to find a way to have the cart not being dependent on the internet, to have some way to locally store that information. And it was such a large amount of information. And again, it's updated daily, so that would have required the internet anyway. We finally just decided to go directly to the source, and then as a backup, just in case there was any kind of outages, we actually are housing a backup resource here locally at SVSU. So that's great to have both those things happening, and then have them both synchronizing as well. It's quite nice. But then, Bree, we also stored some of those interactions in our local database to make the application faster. Is that right?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. So we're pulling down the information from the internet, which is this massive database of several different companies and resources that track all the prescribable drugs in the world, and adding that minor piece of just what we have loaded on the cart, so that it is more responsive, but still checking if there's been any updates. So Adam, you worked a lot with the patients and the allergies and what have you. What was that like, trying to program those and think of all these combinations?
I never learned more in my life other than I did with this situation, because I was forced to see all the different perspectives, different opportunities, and different circumstances that a user could run into, and trying to handle all of the different issues, or someone could, click on something random or accidentally submit blank data. It made it very difficult trying to go through and make sure all the errors are covered, but also make the functionality of the program work. And then we also ran into issues loading. We had to speed up the program a lot, and a lot of us had to learn how to code more efficiently because the program was running slower the way we originally programmed it. And we went through, and everyone, and my team especially, went through and made it so much faster to where it looks like a very fluent running program. And especially with loading all the patient records and being able to sort the patient records by name and just add so much functionality and little things we were able to add. It just is such a beautiful program when it comes together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then we had to learn the secure coding, but we also did the secure logins and using the salt and peppers. And I know, Tyrell, you and I talked a lot about that, being in cybersecurity and applying those things. And that just what was your opinion when we realized what we were going to be doing, and how that worked?
I thought the idea was great. How important it is to make sure you're hashing your passwords. Even though the nursing department probably wasn't looking for something like that, from a security standpoint, that is huge. So I was happy that we were able to implement the salt and pepper along with hashing the passwords and the barcodes. That was a great accomplishment.
Great. Well, I don't see any questions coming in from the chat, but I just want to say again how great it was to work together as a team with everyone, and how proud we are to be able to present our work here and to have it being used over at the school of nursing as well, for all the students there. So
it's really cool to be able to, my family's asking me, what am I doing in school? And I'm like, I'm actually programming something that the school is going to be using in the future. And it's so awesome to be able to say that. And it feels so, I don't know, rewarding, I guess is the right word you would say.
Yeah. Got pride in our school, pride in our work. Yeah.
Yes. SVSU Red Pride. But I would definitely say with this project, we all got a full experience of what it would be like once we graduated, because we had conflicts, but we all resolved those conflicts with some assistance from a mediator. But we all had conflicts.
Our advisor was good. Yeah.
Yes. Dr. James he was the best. He got us all on the right track, kept us pushing for the right areas, and kept us pushing for the common goal. And we all had our goals set. We all were working together on issues. And at the beginning of the year, I will admit, it took us all a minute to get to know each other. But once we got to know each other and our habits, we started to click. Everyone knew when everyone else had to work. Everyone knew when they would normally work on the program. And we were all able to just hop into the calls together and talk. And we wouldn't even talk about programming. We would just talk about everything going on in our lives and stuff as we were programming. But it was like we were sitting in a room together working on the project together. It was like, go ahead.
The team kind of became our social life.
Yes.
Yeah. What do you think, Bree?
I definitely agree with that. I did not have a social life outside of this project because of just how massive the system is. In our video, since we had to submit it so early, it doesn't actually show all of the functionality that we implemented in the system. There's quite a bit still that wasn't shown. But another thing I want to bring up is I want to give props to our testing team. There isn't really anyone here right now to kind of represent themselves, but
Yes.
they were the big reason that we have a functional system and that our issues got fixed.
Yep, this was definitely a team effort. And again, I want to thank everyone for listening to our presentation, and just been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Hello, my name is Elena Short, and I was a NEST Fellow this past year. The NEST program helped me navigate through this year just by providing helpful tips with how to be safe on campus. It also helped me get a better idea of how to be safe and how to interact with the rest of the student body during this difficult time. As a leader of an RSO, it was interesting to see how the NEST Fellows and NEST Ambassadors interacted with RSOs, and they provided a lot of help during that time. And also, as a housing front desk worker, it was very helpful just to have those signs that were up in every building to reinforce the mask wearing policy. And this program has just helped me just feel a little bit more at peace with the whole situation and not worry so much about my financial needs, and also just help me to feel closer to the rest of the student body, even though we're not allowed to gather in person as much as we were before.
Having the opportunity to be a part of the NEST Fellowship program helped me to not only navigate through COVID, but has kept me safe and successful as a student here at Saginaw Valley. One thing that the NEST program helped me with was it allowed me to give feedback to the university weekly through check-ins on the students' feedback of how the protocols are being implemented at Saginaw Valley. I also think that the NEST Fellowship program and plan through campus has helped with communication from the university to the students. Weekly, we have received emails on how to be safe as students, new protocols that are being implemented, where to get tested, and how to get vaccinated as students. I think that Saginaw Valley has done a fantastic job at working at keeping us all safe while still trying to keep us involved on campus. They have communicated with us new protocols and how to just be safe and successful and continue with our schooling here at Saginaw Valley.
Hi, my name's Sarah Ridenauer. I'm a fourth year student at Saginaw Valley State University. I was super excited to start my senior year of college this year, but also was going to be in the middle of a pandemic, so that was going to be a little crazy and make it kind of difficult. But I feel like SVSU did a great job preparing us for the semester, making sure we were safe throughout the school year, and my faculty members also did a great job. I'm in the nursing program, so also kind of difficult things. We had to go to clinicals at the hospitals and stuff, so that was always up in the air what was going to happen for that, but they always kept us in the loop with what was going on, provided us all the necessary PPE. Our professors got us the right masks and 95s, made it so that we were able to do simulations still, so all those aspects were really great. And then also I'm a NEST Fellow, so it was really helpful, I feel like, for us to be able to provide student feedback and the student perspective on how we thought things were being handled at SVSU, and I hope that they were able to take that feedback and make improvements or keep things the way they were going because they were running well. Also, the NEST ambassadors had a great part in the whole system. I feel like they were also supportive. I was a student who had COVID-19 in September, and it was kind of like our first week back, and I was like, oh no. So I didn't really know what to do and stuff, but they walked me through the whole process. I reported that I was positive on Campus Clear, and immediately I was put in contact with the tracer, who was really nice, reached out to me, made sure I was okay first of all, and then made sure that I had everything I was going to need, if I had a place to quarantine, if I had food and water, and making sure that I was going to have a safe place to recover and stuff. And then I also got a call from a NEST ambassador every day until my quarantine was up to track my progress and make sure I was doing okay and had all the things I needed to be okay. So that was always reassuring, knowing that somebody was making sure I was okay when you weren't really sure about what was going on. So that was really helpful, and I hope that they're able to do that for many of their students because I know it made me feel a lot better. I feel like overall SVSU did the best they could to handle the situation when there were so many unknowns, and I'm really excited to graduate as an SVSU alum this summer.
Hi, my name's Paige. I'm a NEST Fellow for the academic year of 2020-2021. So the first question is how the SVSU NEST program not just benefited me as a fellow, but me as a student and the COVID crisis. So I never really came out of my house because of COVID during the initial go about of it, but it definitely helped me gain a little bit of serenity, I guess. I was a lot more calm with everything, and I felt as though I could actually go outside and be on campus. Anything that I learned while participating in the NEST Fellow program, I definitely learned that you need to be aware of others and you need to be accommodating to others and accepting of others. So it was definitely an impactful experience on the way that I view others and how they feel about things. And my last question is something that I made a question for myself. So something that I feel as though I could have done differently as a NEST Fellow or even a student. Wear my mask more, definitely, because when I was outside I kind of was lax with it and I wouldn't wear it. But once I went inside I was pretty adamant about wearing it, but I would definitely want to wear it more in respect for others and in the safety of myself. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sophia Collins, and I am a freshman at SVSU, and I am a part of the NEST program. And a few things that they have done to help me acclimate myself into this new year with the COVID pandemic going on is that they listened to me as a student and listened to my concerns and actually took those concerns into consideration. Not only did the NEST program help me financially through my first semester, but they gave me a sense of community where I felt like my concerns were being listened to and actually taking action with those concerns. Throughout the semester, I was always constantly being emailed about COVID precautions, and also that in itself gave me a sense of support around me and that people actually cared about how we were doing as students in our well-being. And also, especially coming back on campus with this COVID crisis, it was really uneasy becoming more comfortable being here, but with the NEST program, it definitely did help me become more acclimated with living on campus and being more comfortable with the COVID crisis going on.
Hello, my name is Deja Hamilton. I am a fifth-year graduating senior at Saginaw Valley State University, and I would like to tell you about my opinion on the NEST Fellowship Program. The NEST Fellowship Program was basically a program that we had to help implement or observe and watch how COVID procedures were being handled and how people were responding to these procedures and things like that. I like the NEST Fellowship Program because it gave students a voice. It gave me the opportunity to be able to speak for other students, to see their experiences, how they feel, what could be done better. And it also gave me the mindset that SVSU was really trying to take COVID serious. And honestly, it's hard to find people that are taking COVID serious because there are some people that aren't, there are some businesses that aren't, and it is a very serious thing. So with that being said, it just showed that the school is really taking the initiative to make sure these procedures are being followed and to make sure the students feel comfortable. Even outside of the procedures, they were asking questions about, like, do you feel comfortable going to class? How do you think your teachers are responding to it? And things like that. You got to give feedback on different aspects that you wouldn't think are directly affected by the COVID and the procedures.
Hello, my name is Megan Keogh. I'm a freshman at SVSU, and I was so greatly fortunate to be a member of the NEST Fellowship this school year. It would be an understatement to say that this school year has been a bit messy and difficult for everyone, to say the least, but I do believe that NEST did a great job at providing safety, order, and a little bit of sanity during these trying times. I believe that what the NEST Fellowship did for SVSU students and SVSU as a whole, me included, was it provided this place to fall back on if you had any questions about precautionary guidelines or how to stay safe physically during this COVID crisis. I would definitely think of Nest as being the backbone of this school year. I felt that if I personally had any questions about COVID or vaccines or restrictions, that I knew right where to go. And it just shows how responsible and competent the SVSU staff and students are for the preparation and determination that went into putting together this program in such a timely manner to ensure that everyone at SVSU feels safe and comfortable day in and day out. And I greatly appreciate having had the opportunity to be included in the Nest Fellowship. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Riley Hupfer. I'm the director of the Center for Community Engagement at SVSU, and I worked with the Nest Fellows this year. So you just heard from 7 out of our 14 fellows who really focused on supporting the Nest program this year and being able to provide student perspective on Nest communications and everything that campus was doing to keep us safe. So I'd like to thank the donors at this time for this program, giving the students an opportunity to participate in the fellowship. And I'm happy to take any questions that you have. And hi, Brian. Happy Friday. And if there's no questions, I'll just walk through briefly. So we would communicate with various campus parties and bodies on different things for the Nest program, and then reach out to the student team. And it was really beneficial this year, especially as the communications team was constantly trying to update on processes, on move-in, ahead of winter break, that period where we went home at Thanksgiving, that communication. And so the students were really helpful for the communication team in providing their feedback on what they were experiencing and what they might have been missing in the Nest communication. So we worked with them on a weekly basis, sometimes bi-weekly, to send out surveys and ask specific questions and connect them to certain team members if there was more of a personal question that they were hoping to answer. So the students did a great job, and it was a really good program, and I appreciated being a part of it. And if there's no questions for me, come through the chat. I think, Andy, we might want to wrap it up. All right, we're back, Brian. I saw your question and dropped out just after the fact. So in terms of the students' attitudes and how they changed throughout the year, I think you could hear it in the video that, you know, students really appreciated the communication as it went on. And early on, there was so much information and so much that was changing. So I think that throughout the course of the year, as we got better at communicating that, and the students got better at understanding that, laugh out loud, yeah. Understanding all the processes, I think they felt a lot more comfortable to be able to operate in their classes and on campus. And I'll hang out for just a couple extra seconds in case there's a question that jumps in there between the lag time. Okay, well, thank you, Brian, for the question. And thank you, everyone, and especially to our donors for funding this fellowship.
Making an impact, developing community leaders. So we are the servant leaders. We'll do a brief introduction here. My name is Alana Brown, and I'm a Vidito Fellow and an accounting major here at SVSU.
And my name is Joseph Bartels. I am also a Vidito Fellow and an accounting major here at the College of Business. So we were part of the BATS program, us Vidito Fellows, this semester, and I'll quickly explain what the BATS program is. Unfortunately, it was not baseball related or BAT related. In this case, BATS stands for Business, Art, Theater, and Sociology. So the BATS program brings together students from the business department, the art and theater departments, and the sociology department with the goal of working with the First Ward Community Center to address some of the needs in the community. For this year, our project had 3 main steps. The first was to work with the First Ward Fellows to develop a comic book about their lives, their goals and aspirations, and hopefully that comic book will inspire others in the community, the younger generation, to strive for more. The second was to get the First Ward Fellows onto community boards. These are boards within the Saginaw County and Saginaw City. And the third was more of a general one, and that is to develop as leaders, both ourselves and also to help mentor and develop the First Ward Fellows as leaders as they go off and serve on these boards.
So why are we the servant leaders? This is based on 2 things. The purpose of the BATS project is to utilize our leadership skills to serve the community, and then the general purpose of being a leader is to serve those you are leading. And so being a servant and being a leader go hand in hand, hence the name servant leaders. And so throughout this BATS project, we've identified the Super 6 strategies for leadership that are listed here on this slide, and we'll dive into each of these strategies throughout this presentation.
So the first strategy that we have for you is that communication is key. So quick step back, you need 2 things to begin a project. The first of these is the goals. This is the very high level vision, and this is the where are you going, and really gives definition to what you're working towards. And the second is the vision. These are the specific steps that you're taking to get towards these goals. A good example, my grandma always asks me if I'm taking I-75 or the back roads to go up to our cottage. And this is kind of like the route that you need to take in your vision that you need to lead your team towards as you work towards your goals.
So the comic book was a major component of the BATS project this semester. So there were 3 goals within this comic book. So number 1 was to accurately depict the First Word Fellow stories. Number 2 was to develop 5 pages of comic with art students. And then 3, stay within the budget. And so mapping the vision for the comic book, first we developed the First Word Fellow stories, and then we communicated that to the art students, and they created a storyboard for the First Word Fellow story. And then we did a research analysis on the cost for printing the comic book.
So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, this is pretty cool. We've got goals and we've got vision and we try to map them out. This is some great advice. But where does the communication part come in? Well, don't worry, I have an excellent metaphor for you. And that is that your job as the leader is to be like a DAC. So I'm pretty big into music, and the DAC is the digital audio converter. So what it does is it converts the digital signal that your instrument produces into an analog signal that your computer can read. So your job as a leader is to be like this DAC. You're the middle point for your communication, and you kind of take the instructions and kind of filter them out and convert them into something that your team can work towards and move forward with. So how do you communicate in this way? The first good thing to do is to always be asking and receiving questions. You got to ask your team questions to make sure that they understand the goals and the vision and that they're on the right path. And also encourage them to ask you questions to make sure that you're on the right path. The second thing is that more communication is generally better. You got to check in early and often, especially in the virtual environment that we are in right now. And the third thing is to offer encouragement. Being positive as a leader is always a good thing. So you should be positive in your communication as well.
Okay, our second strategy is being a mentor versus being a manager. And so a lot of what we've built up throughout the semester is meeting the goal of having the First Word Fellows join a Saginaw County board. So how do we get there? Through coaching. So the First Word Fellows began the semester already being engaged members of the community. And so with the coaching and support that we can provide them, it allows them to develop even more to be outstanding board members within the community.
So our wonderful mentor, Dom Monastery, has given us his definition of coaching, and it is the art of assisting people to enhance their effectiveness in a way that they feel helped. And the key part here is the way that they feel helped. The way you might have been coached in the past probably will not work for your own team members. So you need to find ways specifically for each individual member of your team to coach them properly.
So the main difference between being a mentor and being a manager is being a coach for somebody instead of being the boss of that person. And so this slide depicts some of the differences between mentoring and managing that resonated the most with our team. So, for instance, in our group, we would lift and support our First Word Fellow instead of drive and push. We would ask and solicit instead of tell and direct. And then we would listen to instead of talk at, and we would be responsive instead of being reactive. And so what exactly did we do? We utilized these 5 coaching skills to act as mentors. So we built relationships by chatting at the beginning and end of each meeting, and we found things in common with one another and built friendships through this setting. And then second, we set clear goals by determining what needed to be accomplished at each meeting, and then we looked ahead to the upcoming weeks. And then we made sure that every group member knew what the goals were for that meeting and for the upcoming weeks.
Another skill that we used was having feedback, both positive and negative. It's important to have a good mix of both so that everyone is staying positive and engaged, but also having some driving negative feedback to really drive improvements. And another strategy we used was being supportive in all things. Probably the best example I have of this is one of our First Word Fellows texted in our group chat that he had got an interview for a new job. And it was really cool to see everybody in the group rally around him and give him support and encouragement for this interview. So trying to foster a culture like that in your group is super important in your coaching.
Okay, and lastly, we exercised effective listening. And so we did this when we were developing our visioning community plans. We really listened to our First Word Fellow, what they wanted to do in their community service, and then we really built a plan based on what we heard from them.
So the third strategy that we have for you is to manage the outgroup. And you might be wondering what the outgroup is. Thankfully, it's a pretty simple concept. The outgroup is just an individual or individuals in a group that don't identify with the larger group.
So based on some things that happened this semester, our group was particularly susceptible to an outgroup forming. So we began with 2 First Word Fellows and 2 Vidido Fellows. And towards the beginning of the semester, one of our First Word Fellows was unable to continue their participation in the program. So that left us with 1 First Word Fellow and 2 Vidido Fellows for the remainder of the semester. So in this situation, a couple things could have happened. Number 1, the First Word Fellow may not have identified with us Vidido Fellows. They may have felt that there were things that we knew and understood and maybe they didn't. And then secondly, us Vididos could have excluded the First Word Fellow. And so both of these things could have resulted in an outgroup. But we didn't let that happen. There were a few things that we did to prevent an outgroup from forming. So number 1, we included everybody. We ensured that everyone was included and listened to in every meeting, and every project that was assigned to us as a team was a combined effort between the 3 of us. And then secondly, we built relationships. As discussed before, we spent a lot of time before and after meetings chatting and catching up. And then lastly, we exercised effective listening. We really sought out the thoughts of everybody in the group, particularly our first word fellow, just because a lot of the project was based around their community involvement. And so we listened effectively and built our project based off of what we were hearing from everybody.
So the fourth strategy that we have for you is to trailblaze. So our project had a lot of moving parts and we generally had very limited direction. So this is just a quick overview of all the parts that we had to manage. We had our vision and community plans where we sat down with our first ward fellows and tried to figure out what they wanted to do in the community and what boards they wanted to serve on. We had the comic book where we met with first ward and the art students to actually physically come up with the comic book. We had the focus group where we facilitated to help the first ward's fellows gather feedback on the community and figure out what they're going to do on their boards. And we also have this presentation as well.
Okay, so when there's not much direction, you kind of have to create your own. So to do that, you need to see what your goal is and create the best course of action based on that goal. And once you've created a vision, you must take ownership of it. If you don't fully believe in what you're doing, others won't either. So a general example of how we did this was in our weekly meetings. We would meet with all of the BAT students and then we would be given an assignment for our team. We would go into breakout rooms and we would create a vision for what we wanted to do for the assignment and then practice it and take it back to the whole group and present it to everybody. And that is how we kind of created a vision and took ownership of it on a weekly basis. And now that it's the end of the semester, all of the moving parts are coming together. So the comic book is nearly done, and then the vision and community plans and the focus group, the information obtained from that has given the first word fellows a lot of ideas and some content to take with them when they hopefully join a county board. And then this presentation encompasses everything that has been done this semester, and it allows us to reflect on what we've learned. Then our next strategy is utilizing your team. So throughout this project, we've trusted our teammates. That is what this acronym is for. So especially being in a virtual environment, it's important to trust that your teammates will do their part and communicate effectively.
So one of the things that we used to trust our teammates better was the idea of strengths. And this is just a quick definition from the inventor of strengths, Donald Clifton. He says that strengths are attributes or qualities of an individual that account for successful performance. So how do we use strengths as a tool to trust our teammates this semester? We did three main things. So we focused on areas that our team members excelled in. Donald Clifton, the guy from the quote, kind of invented this idea of positive psychology, where you build up people's good attributes and strengths, and you more downplay their weaknesses. So trying to really build upon the strengths of our first ward fellows was a key component this semester. We also utilized this wonderful math equation. I know everyone loves math, but it is that talent times investment equals strength. So we really tried to identify our first ward fellows' talents, the areas that they're naturally good at, and try and give them opportunities to develop. So how did we give them these opportunities? We delegated tasks based on their talents and their strengths. So again, this comes from really knowing our team members and then giving them duties that correspond to these strengths.
So our sixth and final strategy is staying grounded. So it's important to understand why we lead and what it means. So a lot of people lead because they want to benefit from its byproducts of fortune, recognition, and status. However, this isn't good. You should really be focusing on leading due to genuine passion, desire to help others, and being purpose-driven, which are the catalysts of strong leadership. So others can tell when you're when you're insincere about your motives for leading, and if you aren't genuine in your intentions and missions, then they won't be either.
So this kind of brings us back to our name, the servant leaders. And we really chose this name because it brings us back to who the project is really about. It's not about us as the VITATO fellows and the leaders. It's about the First Word fellows and their goals for the community that they're going to take to the board and their story that's going to be put into the comic book. And it's about the community as well and the community needs that came up in our focus group. And our job as the leaders was not to try and direct the goals of the First Word and the needs of the community, but more to make sure that these mesh together well and that the First Ward fellows have a good foundation on which to take to the boards that they're going to be serving in.
Okay, so at the end of the day, there are 3 things that you should do to stay grounded as a leader. So number 1 is to be genuine. As we discussed before, you should be in it for the catalyst, not for the byproducts. And then number 2 is remember who you serve. Leaders are meant to serve others, which ties into our name of servant leaders. And then lastly, you must enable others. You should recognize and empower others to be the best that they can be.
So just as a real quick recap of all of the strategies that we've discussed so far, our first one was communication. This comes from being clear and defining the goals and the route that you're going to take to these goals, and to be like the DAC, be that center point of communication that helps your team function at their highest.
Number 2 is being a mentor and not a manager. You should be a coach and listen and support whoever you are mentoring.
The third was to try and mitigate the outgroups, and some good ways to do this are to create relationships and to be inclusive and listen whenever possible.
Okay, number 4 is trailblazing. You need to create a vision and take ownership of that vision.
Fifth was to trust your teammates, and this comes from utilizing their strengths and giving them opportunities for growth and development.
And lastly, you must stay grounded as a leader. You should remember why you started and be in it for the positive things and enable others to be the best that they can be.
Thank you, folks, very much for coming to our presentation. And we hope that you learned something about leadership and can take something away to your own lives.
All right, thank you for watching our presentation. I'm seeing one question here. It says, what are some of the passions and service interests that the First Word Fellows shared with you? And were there any opportunities that inspired you? So one of our First Word Fellows was very interested in serving the community and specifically cleaning it up. He had worked with, I believe it was Mustard Seeds before, and maybe a couple of other organizations that really interest him in that way. Joey, do you have anything to add?
So we kind of reached out to Mustard Seed for this First Word Fellow to try and get some more of that happening in the community, and really just tried to, he had that passion, and we tried to reach out and find other groups that could help carry that forward for him.
Okay, and then one other question that we have is, what are some challenges that you faced with this project? So one of the biggest things that we had an issue with was just being on an online format all semester. It was kind of tough to work with one another in that way. And then communication was another big thing too.
Yep, like we said in the presentation, communication is absolutely king, especially in this virtual environment that we're in right now. So trying to reach out often to everybody, asking questions, making sure they know what's happening, all that good stuff to ensure that communication is flowing properly, especially when you can't meet in person.
Okay. And I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you everybody for watching, and thank you for your question there.
Hello. For those of you who are listening that may not know me, I'd like to go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Brady Failer. I'm a fourth-year RA student leader here at SVSU who serves on the Alternative Breaks e-board and serves on the e-board of Alpha Kappa Lambda fraternity. I am also, the reason that I'm making this presentation, a member of the 22nd class of Roberts Fellows, a fellowship focused on leadership from the global perspective. I'm excited to share with all of you a sort of culmination of lessons learned in my experience as a leader here at SVSU, and hopeful that my testimony will broaden your perspective of leadership and possibly challenge any preconceived notions you may have had about leadership. In my experience, I've learned that leadership is complex, it can be lonely and quite isolating at times, and it takes a lot of courage. In demonstrating the complexity of leadership, I think it may be easier to begin with what leadership is not. The first thing I want to say is leadership is not something that is begotten by having a role in leadership. Just because I am a leader and I have the role of an RA does not make me a good leader. I have the role, but I'm not just a good leader for having that role. It's about the behaviors and the processes that happen when I am a leader as an RA. I expect most of you in the audience would not disagree and may have had firsthand experiences with people who hold leadership roles but don't have strong leadership and are not strong leaders. Certainly, though, people that hold important roles and strong leadership roles can be strong leaders, but it's just not always the case. Another thing that doesn't always translate to leadership is success. I'm fortunate to be a successful student with good grades. We'll be graduating this May, exciting for me. And I've had a multitude of experiences that are diverse and have made me a well-rounded person that has a good resume that I can use to apply for jobs. But none of that makes me a leader. Being a member of the 22nd class of Roberts Fellows might give me some merit in talking about leadership, and I hope it does today, but it does not make me a good leader. I wasn't a good leader just because I was able to perform to get into the Roberts Fellowship. But hopefully the Roberts Fellowship has helped me improve, and I think it has, on my leadership skills. Leadership is far more complex than achievement ever will be, in my opinion, but I think often the two concepts of achievement and success and leadership are confused as the same thing. To begin to point at what leadership is and the complexity of it, I'm going to share a little bit about, a few things that I've learned from every Robert Fellow's favorite book on leadership theory. It's called Nordhaus, and we had a great time reading it. Nordhaus explained that there are many different ideas about leadership to consider. It's a 200-page book. I won't be reading 200 pages to you in this testimony, but I will pick out the things that I found very important when studying this book. The first is followership. The theory of followership, which you're asking, what's followership? Hold on. Theory of followership recognizes that followers play a large role in the outcome of leadership. as the process of leading requires the process of following. Followers can have natural needs and fears that, if mishandled by leaders, can actually lead to very destructive leadership. For example, if a leader has a follower that needs a strong sense of validation, needs a strong sense of reassurance for the work that they do, and the leader refuses to give them that validation that they need, that follower may begin to doubt and lose faith in themselves and may not reach the heights that they would have if the leader had given them the validation and reassurance that they needed. That's just one of many examples. Followers have other needs, and they also have fears that leaders need to consider. And that this whole process of followership can be either detrimental or extremely beneficial if a leader understands that and applies those ideas in their leadership. The other theory, or I guess there's three more theories that I'd like to touch on. The next one is adaptive leadership. This is when leaders focus on adapting and preparing followers for changes, and they adapt their behaviors to fit certain situations. This is something that I have to do as an RA. There are many situations and opportunities for me as an RA, such as the community council advisor, where I can step back and have a more advisory role with the community council. And then there's other situations as an RA, like emergency ones, such as the fire that we had in MJB, where I would need to step up and have a more strict and serious regime. I'm going to be more commanding. Adaptive leadership kind of paints the picture of when to step up and when to step back. The next theory that I'd like to discuss is authentic leadership, where leaders focus on trust, relationships, and transparency. I think this is the default form of leadership that most leaders should be in when they're not sort of being active leaders. I guess this would be the passive leadership theory. I think this is where leaders help to develop a sense of trust in their followers, and they show empathy to them, and the followers in turn trust them and hold them to a high standard. That's authentic leadership. The last one I want to touch on is servant leadership. This is where leaders focus on meeting their followers' needs and are selfless at the benefit of others. This is the form of leadership I practiced when I went on alternative breaks, and I was a site leader on alternative breaks. It was about serving the community, helping those, specifically those in servant leadership who are underprivileged, and using a variety of skills to be of service in any way possible. And that's not always being commanding or doing things, but it's about educating yourself and volunteering to fit the needs of any sort of underprivileged group. That's servant leadership. So those are kind of all different ideas about, what leadership is. There's plenty more ideas that Nora House talked about. Those are just the important ones. Hopefully that has already kind of broadened your perspective. The next thing I want to kind of discuss about leadership is that it can be quite lonely. As Roberts Fellows, we are very fortunate and privileged to have and hear the testimonies from President Bashant during one of our seminars and Provost Huntley, each independent of each other. And there are a few takeaways I have from that, and I've been thinking a lot about some of the things that they said and how I've also maybe experienced on a much lower level some of the things that they were talking about that they've experienced as leaders. The first involves the leader's role of the decision maker. And this is isolating because the consequences of the decisions that you make as a leader will most likely always fall square on your shoulders. Whether it was a good or a bad decision, you have to be alone in the responsibility often. Other things are that you experience things first, and often leaders are the first to have to stand up or stand for something that they think is right or wrong. It can be difficult and isolating if others too feel the same way, but yet don't have the courage to stand up with the leader and support them. That can be isolating. It can also be isolating to maintain vigilance, and a bit exhausting when you are a well-known leader in a community, such as President Bashand or Provost Huntley, yet have to constantly be aware of how others could perceive your every action, your every word, and you must stay vigilant and maintain that strong reputation. I think it goes back to authentic leadership theory. Otherwise, people would begin to question your authenticity and may even call you a hypocrite. Lastly, leadership takes a tremendous amount of courage. I think if we're going on a continuum of courage and we're increasing how much courage you need as a leader, the first thing that I think, which takes a lot of courage and can be quite scary as a leader, is how you manage conflict. There's really three types of conflict you experience as a leader. First is between two other parties. You're a third party as a leader, and you need to mediate and manage the conflict of the people that you are leading. The second is when you have conflict with another party, where you find that not everybody will agree with your decisions, yet it's still important to appeal to all and try to find middle ground where you can. But oftentimes others will have different ideas, and you need to consider and be willing to consider the best interests of all and stick to your guns sometimes as a leader when managing conflict with others. Or, as I've experienced, the conflict could be within yourself. Leaders must sometimes deal with the consequences of decisions that they have made or will make, as we discussed before, and that can be isolating, which can cause conflict within yourself. And it makes it important for every leader to ensure that they are mentally well and to step back from any leadership roles when they need time to work on something like their mental health. I'll admit this is something that I have been bad at, and I've improved over my college experience. I've had the tendency to overexert myself and have many involvements, and it brings me down as a leader when I burn out, and I could have high levels of stress and anxiety. Those things brought me down, made me not as good of a leader as I could be, until I learned to have a healthy dose of self-care every now and then and learn when to step back and maybe not volunteer for that extra thing just to get ahead. The bottom line is leaders face a lot of challenges. Not everyone will have the same interest or ideas as a leader. Often these different interests can be of a great challenge and may cause leaders to stumble and fail. Whether the leaders had control of the situation or they made a bad decision that harmed their organization or fell short of a goal that they set for themselves or their community or their organization, failure is inevitable. Strong leaders are able to move past these failures. It takes perseverance, passion, and courage to be able to move on from some failures. For me, when I experience any sort of failure, whether it was within my control or not, I think of my favorite quote, and this is what I will leave everybody with and how I will end this presentation. It's by Rocky Balboa. He says, "It's not about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward, how much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done." And that's how I view leadership. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for asking all the questions in the chat, and you feel free to ask any more that you might have while I answer some of them. Oh, I'm gonna have to mute myself. I'm so sorry. They gave me directions, but I made a mistake. Yeah, I got it. Thank you so much. So followership, thanks for asking about this, Dr. Foss. I think this is actually really important, and I wish I maybe would have touched a little bit more on this. I think followership is so interesting to me because of my RA role on campus and how I've dealt with students in a one-on-one fashion in a lot of occasions. Also, I have been a follower in the past and have had leaders myself that have been sort of apathetic to their followers and kind of make decisions, maybe what's best for themselves and don't think as much about the followers. And I don't think those were leaders, and they're more of air quote leaders, and that people who hold those positions just kind of don't lead. I kind of talked about that in the beginning. But I do think it's a lot about my RA role, why I delved so deeply into followership and why that stuck out to me so much when I read that book. Hi, Stephen. Thanks for joining. I think when I talked about authentic leadership, COVID, we're doing this presentation virtually, and I imagine in the past this would have been completely different. And I think the most important thing that I've learned through COVID, and perhaps my alternative breaks role is what I'm thinking of, where I'm doing presentations sort of like this format to help the site leaders and educate them on how to be good site leaders and alternative breaks. Understanding that there's a ton of Zoom fatigue, and being realistic and having realistic expectations, I think has done me a lot of good and done any followers I may have had a lot of good as well. And I think it's more appreciated than not when you're especially considerate, especially in this past year. I know people have been on about how COVID is an excuse for everything, but I think it's a legitimate excuse. And it's not just COVID, it's the fact that we're all in our homes, we're all in our rooms virtually, and we really haven't had control over that in the past year. So it's important to be a little bit more patient and have compassion, I think, in this past year, especially, and also in my RA role. And Andrew says, how do you intend to apply what you've learned about leadership in your career? Oh, I wish I could answer that question perfectly. I really don't know. I intend, though, to really try to stand up for the things that I talked about in my presentation, really stand up for authentic leadership, and really stand up for followership. If I'm a follower, I want my voice to be heard, and I think that's important. Like I said, it takes a lot of courage, but that's something that I've been working on this past year and the challenges that I've come across. And I hope that if I ever see something wrong, that I will stand up and say something about it. I'm kind of thinking of Dr. Bashan's, President Bashan's note about the Chauvin verdict and how it's ask if we can be the ones to make the change that makes the world better. Thank you all so much. I'll give a few moments for any other questions. If I don't see any, I can end here. There's only 2 minutes. We can let the next person come in. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Good luck in your presentation later, Stephen. All right, that wraps it up, folks. Thank you so much.
USITT stands for the United States Institute for Theater Technology.
The United States Institute of Theater Technology.
United States Institute of Theater Technology.
The United States Institute for Theater Technology.
United States Institute for Theater Technology.
It is a big conference that's held every year where a bunch of theater people and companies all come together and they show their work.
USITT allowed me to attend workshops that will help me better myself in the future as a costume designer.
One of my favorite things about attending this conference was the just amount of opportunities for me to learn new things and to be inspired. We learn a lot about theater in our program here at SVSU, but we are a BA program, so a lot of our information that we take in is very generalized. And so it's a wide scope of info and less specialization that like a BFA might offer. And USITT has this super highly specialized workshops and sessions about things that I would have never even realized were a thing.
USITT is essentially a giant convention of theater practitioners, theater makers, theater goers, theater doers that come together and celebrate technical theater or any aspects of theater that are related to the technical side of things, whether that be lighting, sound, costuming, props, any branch of theater that is not acting or directing.
USITT has always been a inspiring and huge learning process for me in my time here at SVSU.
I learned a lot at USITT, and it really is going to help me in the future as I'm getting ready to graduate and apply to jobs. And there was a lot of information on how to market yourself better to jobs or things like that, and also just some knowledge that might give me like a leg up on once I start looking for jobs outside of school.
We all get to learn more about new elements for our field and get to learn a little bit more about different techniques or different areas that we may not have been familiar with prior to going to the conference.
A couple of highlights from my week was the opera stage management panel, where we learned about the difference between opera stage management and regular stage management. And then there was a stage management panel on stopping the show. That was really interesting, because I just love listening to stage managers talk about like literally anything.
One of the highlights from my week at USITT is that I learned how to tame a costume storage, which I think will be super helpful for back at SVSU. And then I also got to meet so many different head costume designers at different companies and network with them a little bit about summer internships.
And some of the highlights from this year would be being able to keep up the hype and the amount of learning opportunities that came from USITT, even though it was in a virtual setting. I personally have been struggling with this whole online learning, especially as of late, and USITT this year was very beneficial to me, and I was able to follow along to a lot of the sessions I attended.
A highlight from my week at USITT would be the availability of theatrical intimacy workshops. Theatrical intimacy is essentially training any sort of blocking or choreography surrounding intimacy. So whether that be holding hands, whether that be simulating like romantic interactions on stage, all of those things would be determined by an intimacy choreographer. And that helps get rid of any Title IX confusion or situations that could potentially make any actor or director feel unsafe, which I thought was super interesting and super needed, especially in the arts, which is not really something that people think about.
For my future career, I am planning to be a stage manager, and after going to USITT, it was easier for me to visualize how many places, like companies and theaters that need or want stage managers. There are multiple options for me that for whatever I wanted to do afterwards, and it was nice to visually see that there are lots of options out there for me.
One workshop webinar thing that I attended that I really enjoyed and learned a lot from was one about disability and accessibility in theater, and how the Americans with Disabilities Act requires places to be accessible, but really that's the bare minimum, and how a lot of backstages aren't accessible and a lot of things like that. And it really made me want to continue working on disability in theater and bring my experiences to something like that. It was really interesting.
I also really love the feeling of human connection and artistic expression. even in the virtual space. I personally felt super stuck and very separated during the pandemic. I know a lot of people have, but separated from my art as well and my work. So this conference made me feel very seen by other artists and made me realize that a lot of people are feeling very similarly, especially a lot of artists. And also just inspired by the innovation and creativity across the board amongst these artists to make up for our industry being shut down for over a year.
It's so great to see the levels of expertise at USITT, from learning from a fellow college student to watching a workshop with a lighting designer that light designs for the Grammys for the past decade and has Emmys sitting on the shelf behind him. The diversity of teachers and people in the audience is always amazing, and it's so inspiring to know that there's so many people just continuing to try and learn and spread the information that they already know.
USITT will benefit me in my future career as a lighting designer or lighting engineer, lighting technician, because it offers a lot of chances to network my skills and my capabilities and a lot of opportunities to introduce my resume to professionals in the industry. Also, through the use of workshops, we are able to further network our capabilities and skills with the people that are actually leading the workshops, or just other people within the workshops themselves that don't even necessarily have to be leading it. They could just be attending the workshop same as you, and then you get to talking, and before you know it, you have an internship or a summer job opportunity.
At USITT, I learned that I could be a costume designer, and that was something that I had doubts for a very long time. I'm super excited to continue my work in costume design.
A major highlight for me from going to USITT is I figured out what I'm going to do for a future career. Going into the conference, I didn't really know which direction I wanted to go in, just something management related, but not really sure what. And because I went to this conference, I attended a session about what production managers' roles will be like in the future as we begin to do hybrid events moving forward as things open up. And I realized that the knowledge that is needed is something that I already have a good base for, and it's something that I'm very passionate about and very excited about. So I ended up realizing that that would be a good fit for me moving forward, and I'm very excited to say that I learned that because of going to this conference.
One of the things that I really appreciate that I learned about myself is what I like and don't like, or I learned that I really don't want to continue doing, because it's not an interest to me.
Thank you so much to the undergraduate research program and to SVSU.
Thank you to the undergraduate research program and SVSU.
A big shout out and a million thank yous to the undergraduate research program and SVSU.
And I'm so grateful for the research program, SVSU, and the foundation to be able to give us the opportunity to attend and go to this trip. Even though it wasn't in person this year, it was still one of the best experiences and best moments of this year.
When I went in 2019, it was an incredible experience being able to go on the show floor and getting to meet people and network in person. I wasn't sure how the conference would go this year, being fully online, but it was still an incredible experience, and I'm very thankful that I was able to go. I don't know if I would have realized what direction I want to go in for a future career had I not attended this conference, or when I may have figured that out in the future. So I'm very appreciative that I had the opportunity to go to this conference again, and it was a definite highlight for the final semester here at SVSU. So thank you so much.
It is so important to let artists know that their voices are heard and valued, and it's super important to champion those who don't necessarily get all the recognition sometimes. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Lucas Inman. I am one of the students who attended USITT this past year, introducing everyone else who went with us. I'm a theater major This is my third year. I'm also a computer information systems minor. Um, and we are really grateful that we got to attend USITT this year. Even though it wasn't in person, it's still an amazing experience and such a great networking opportunity for us. And it's always such a good time to meet all the really high up people in our industry and some of the people who are just coming into the industry and get to know everyone who is in their different areas in their life right now.
Hi everyone, I'm Rhiannon Hall. I'm a senior theater major, double minor in English and Communications, and my focus is in dramaturgy and stage management.
Hello everyone, my name is Danny Durst. I am a senior. I have one more semester left. I'm a double major in theater and communications, and my focuses are costume design and acting.
Hi, I'm Quinn. I am a third year theater major in creative writing minor, and currently my focuses are light design, stage management, and disabled theater.
Hello, my name is Morgan Gradowski. I'm a senior that will be graduating this semester, and I'm a public administration major and theater minor, and I primarily do stage management.
Hi, I'm Kylie. I'm a third year theater major with a double minor in communications and music, and my main focus is stage management.
Hi everyone, my name is Jaden O'Berry. I am currently a third year theater major with a double minor in English and creative writing, and my focus is mainly in lighting design, but I also dabble in sound and direction.
Okay, so we wanted to open up the floor to any questions that anybody might have about our experience at USITT this year. So yeah, any questions you guys might have, we will be more than happy to answer.
In the meantime, I feel like it could be a fun question prompter if we talked a little bit more in depth about specific experiences we had at not ACTF, that's a different conference, USITT. So something that was really cool for me is I got to go to a history of lighting aesthetics workshop, and I got to meet actual Broadway lighting designers. And in the Q&A portion of the workshop, they actually answered one of my questions about how to avoid burnout as a lighting designer, which is super necessary and super needed for a lot of different technicians, just because more often than not, we balance a lot on our plates and we're doing a lot of different things, especially when we move into like a real career field. We're going to be expected to do multiple shows at the same time. So it was really interesting to get to see how to manage stress and to manage burnout, at least from a lighting designer's perspective, which is something super niche that I needed. One of the experiences that I had at USITT was as a costume designer, we deal with a lot of different body types and people from a lot of different backgrounds. And so it was really cool. I actually had a couple of different panels where we learned about how to deal with mental health and specifically eating disorders with costume design, because that can be a big trigger. Specifically, they mentioned like saying measurements out loud, which is not something that I ever would have thought about. But really, it allowed me to come back and be a stronger costume designer.
I'm not seeing any questions yet, so if anyone wants to jump in with another story, we've got a minute.
Yeah, I can go. I went to this one like panel where they talked about how technical theater actually lends itself really well to deaf and hard of hearing people, not just on stage, like, because clearly deaf people belong on stage, but like how technical theater really is done pretty well between deaf and hearing artists, and how most of our stuff is visual anyway. And they specifically talked about scenic painting and like the different techniques, and how you have people who communicate solely through ASL and then people who know zero ASL and just for some reason cannot pick it up. It's hard for them to handle. So that was really interesting, and seeing how they answered a lot of questions on how to make spaces more accessible to deaf and hard of hearing artists. And
that was really interesting to me, and I really liked that.
So one question that I'm seeing is, how has COVID affected our industry? If anyone wants to jump on that.
I can take the lead on that one. Just from my own personal experience, I had a couple of different internship opportunities that were supposed to be lined up for the summer previous. So it would have been my summer as a sophomore going into my junior year. And because of COVID, all of those internships were canceled or postponed until this summer. But because things are starting to open up and we're starting to get a little bit more flexible, they moved curtain times forward. So the need for lighting isn't necessarily a thing because they're utilizing outdoor spaces and moving the curtain times up. So unfortunately, I don't have an internship opportunity this summer, but it did allow me the chance to further my education studying abroad, because while internships and specific career opportunities might be on pause for right now, we still have the ability to further our education, at least at an educational institution. So that was something that affected me directly, and I know has probably affected multitudes of different designers just like myself.
To add on to that, and kind of a more general scope of things, we've seen a lot of theater people have to go into this virtual format, including ourselves here at SVSU. We focus primarily on more of a TV and film kind of aspect, which is a very different industry from the theater industry. But while at USITT, we got the opportunity to meet with people who have worked in the TV and film industry and continue to expand our knowledge right before we went into our last show of the season, and continue to have that knowledge for the upcoming years, because who knows when we're going to get shot right back down into quarantine, even though things are looking up. And another thing on how COVID has affected our industry, one of the sessions that I attended talked about how, even though this seems like a really big hit to the theater industry and the live entertainment industry, lots of people have faith that we are going to come back at full capacity at some point or another, because if you think about it, who can live without entertainment? It's really what keeps our world going in certain ways. And you might think you could go without it, but as soon as you take all entertainment away, music, sports, theater, movies, TV, like these are all things that we all work on and would like to go into someday. And there's just no way that all of that is going to disappear.
I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat, so if anyone else has any other little anecdotes they want to tell before we head out. I'm not seeing any, so Jaden.
Thank you for the opportunity for hearing us today, because a lot of people don't necessarily know the ins and outs of technical theater, and you're not really supposed to know we exist until something goes wrong. So acknowledging that we exist on a general scale is step one to acknowledging that our career field will come back even stronger with more support. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for this opportunity and for listening to our presentation today. And we will see you guys around campus.
Thank you for allowing us to give you an update on some of the exciting projects Cardinal Solutions has been doing the last year. First, know that Cardinal Solutions promotes diversity, equity, and inclusion. We labor diligently to promote minority populations in and around the Great Lakes Bay region, and we serve and support nonprofits that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. For one example, we turn to Women of Colors, for which we've just completed a social media campaign. This is a nonprofit that has served the Saginaw area for more than 28 years. Women of Colors host several yearly events that help the community, including inspirational forums, training for youth with technology, warm clothes drives, and developing life skills for area youth. Cardinal Solutions created a complete 9 social media campaign threads. Each campaign thread included 5 social media posts per platform, resulting in over 150 posts for social media. Here's an example of one part of one thread, the leadership role, and it was focused on Evelyn McGovern herself. Here's an example of just one of their programs, and all 5 of the posts related to that program. This is the technology and youth, and so here we see the leadership. We go on to the interactive post, and then move to statistics, and then explain what we do, and then have an animated quote from those involved. This was a year-long, or is a year-long campaign. Now that it's been posted, in the first month of engagement, we saw engagement drastically increase, as well as donations. Another thing we're excited about is our work for the Center for Community Engagement. We're helping to develop a volunteer app. We've started with the interface, and the whole idea behind this app is that it's a way to engage both the community and student volunteers in various projects. So we can benefit both nonprofits and students in this process. The app will connect local community with service opportunities for our students. And let me just show the app here really quickly. Let's see. This would be the home screen showing you some of the things going on in your area. If you wanted to look more specifically, there's 2 ways to do that. One, you could look at some of the top rated listings and sign up for something like that. Or you could type in a specific topic that was interesting to you as a volunteer and find something related to that. And then if you decided that you'd like to help out, you commit to be there or chat with the organizer about some specifics. This would also keep track of an individual's service hours, which would be very nice. And of course, you have some settings here. You can go back to the home page. Okay, well, that's how that would work, and I'm sure you could see how that could help with our community engagement. And we're very grateful for the Center for Community Engagement allowing us to work on this project with them. Another project is the Saginaw County Prevention Coalition. They needed a logo, a brand, a website, and we also decided to develop an activity book for them. So the Saginaw County Prevention Coalition is a community coalition of youth, parents, schools, coaches, librarians, doctors, nurses, police officers, as well as faith-based organizations, business owners, civic groups, and community members who want to prevent substance abuse in our youth. Here's the logo that was chosen, the tagline that was chosen. Here is the website. We could take a look at that. Nice up and running. And we also list all our partners here, which are quite a few. We have a lot of partners engaged in this process, which is really exciting. The activity book that we designed has the theme of Saginaw Awesome, and it features notable people from Saginaw, famous locations in the Saginaw area, as well as mazes and crossword puzzles and coloring pages. This book is for the Saginaw youth of middle school age, and we're very grateful for the grant that supported this project from the Foundation's office. Thank you. We've also done a number of wall displays that have been received very well. These are based on research into the top concerns of the new incoming freshman class, commonly referred to as Generation Z. They seek to stay out of debt and gain an education and a degree specific to a career. So our wall displays focused on showing alumni with multiple successful career paths, and the displays also showed other career paths related to each degree. The overall message being, you can follow your passion, earn a degree that leads to a successful career in art or graphic design. Then, of course, we're continuing on with our problem-solving map series. That's the 6th grade math book series. This comes from the core idea of Dr. Danilo Sirius, his work that is designed to help our children learn both math and content and thinking skills. This workbook is a supplemental learning tool for expressions and equations. That's the first one, both teacher and student edition. We have these concepts. They're the building blocks for more advanced mathematics, including pre-algebra, algebra, ratios, and proportions and geometry. So we're excited to have this completed and published. It's available now on Amazon, and yeah, that's both the teacher edition and student editions. So those are just a few of the Cardinal Solutions projects that have been going on the last year, and we thank you for letting us share those with you now. Why don't you tell us some things about what you've learned in this class compared to a traditional classroom? Why don't you tell us some things about what you've learned in this class compared to a traditional classroom?
I really valued the opportunity to work across disciplines. I'm a technical writing major, so I've had a lot of really great opportunities in my coursework to collaborate with other technical writers. But through Cardinal Solutions, I got to work with a graphic designer for the first time. And that experience really helped me see my work in a new light and gave me a good perspective that I've been able to use in more professionally oriented experiences after graduation. So it was really helpful to look at my work in that framework. I also enjoyed being able to work closely with a real client, and I enjoyed being able to develop a good relationship with the client and then being able to see my work implemented in the real world and have it achieve real results for a local community organization, which was very rewarding. It wasn't something that I did only for the purpose of a class and for an imagined audience. It had people that it was directly impacting, which was really rewarding.
Thank you very much. Easton?
It's definitely interesting, doing this whole online stuff. I'm not, that experienced as of now. I just graduated from SVSU, so it's definitely a new experience, working online and really starting my career as a graphic designer. Working in problem-solving maps, it's definitely a fresh take on the profession, and it's a good starting point for me. It really is.
Thank you to you both. I appreciate that. Let's see, Andy, do we have any questions coming in?
We have one question from Haley Smathers. With the volunteer app interface, did students have to create multiple versions for iPhones and Android, or are you able to use the same app on both devices?
Well, that's a great question. We intend to use the same rational design for both. They'll probably have to be altered, but that is in the programming stage. So for stage one, the initial research and proposal for the interface, that's what we've completed so far. And now the next stage is going to, hopefully, our partners in computer science, figuring out how much would be needed as a development to get that coded. And then they'll do it both in for Android and for iPhone. This is a pattern we followed before when we made the museum app. So thank you, that's a good question.
All right, then I do have a question for the students. What did you learn from working directly with community organizations and partners?
Allison, would you like to answer that one?
Sure. For my project, I was working with the Women of Colors organization. And by working directly with that organization, I really learned the value of doing a lot of preliminary research beforehand and working closely to understand their mission and goals in order to create the most effective deliverables with my team, so that we were creating something that it met our goals, but it also met their goals, and it met the goals of their stakeholders and the people that they were sharing this content with. So I think being able to consider the multiple audiences that will be impacted by your work was a really valuable experience for me as a technical writer.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions, Andy or Easton? Would you like to chime into that last question, what you learned as a graphic designer working with a nonprofit organization?
Sure. It's definitely a new experience with working as a team. That's definitely something that's very valuable to someone like me. And especially whenever I work on something in this project, having the necessary feedback to go back and do it again, perfect it, is definitely very valuable.
Thank you very much. Andy, any other questions coming in?
Nope, that's it for questions we have right now. Do have a couple thank yous, but that's it for questions, it looks like.
Okay. Dr. Danilo Sirius, you haven't been able to make a comment about problem-solving maps. Would you like to comment on that project?
Okay, thank you, Blake. Well, it's been an experience. I've been working with Cardinal Solution for a while, and I'm a business professor, and it was my first experience working with designers. So I've been learning a lot about that. So it's not only students that are being benefited by this experience, but also faculty who can interact with other professors in other colleges. One of the things that students may not see, but they experience while doing that, is learning some of the soft skills that are needed to succeed in the marketplace now. Things like teamwork and project management. Sometimes I joke, we have in our previous meeting, we use project management tools to manage our tasks. And I was supposed to do a task that another student suggested. But she then wrote a task for me to do. So I purposely didn't do it, and Easton is laughing because he knows. And the following week, he said, no, you didn't do it. You didn't write a task, right? So you learned all the skills you had to write. If you're doing a project management, you have to make sure that you use the tools available to you. And from a business professor perspective, that's something that is good. It's good to see, because the student laughed and said, okay, we're right, and then immediately wrote the task with 2 days. So I can do it as a professor. And Easton was a witness of that. So in addition to the technical skills that the students are applying, work with other students that are in different disciplines, they're learning the soft skills that are extremely important in the marketplace now: leadership, team building, project management, communication skills, and all these things. So it's been quite an experience. So it's been good not only for students but also for professors. All right. Yes, that's my comment.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I fully agree. The students learn so much. If you look at the traditional way of teaching, we very often use lecture and reading assignments and things like that, but retention for those tools are very low. But if you use, if you teach another person your skill, the retention goes way up. And I think that's one of the things that's happening, and it's crossing disciplines. For example, a technical writer might be teaching a skill to a graphic designer or vice versa, as they're both on the same team working on similar tasks for the same client. And when they do that, the retention of that skill goes way up. And so I think they benefit without maybe recognizing it that way. So that's a great benefit, I would hope, that in the long term is recognized. We do have a few other projects that we hope to reveal in the future. We're excited to be able to work with Covenant Healthcare as a system right now. In fact, we're working with Covenant Healthcare Partners. That's a network of doctors and physicians in the area that work directly with the hospital. So we'll have a brand, logo, brand, and new website for that organization. And we're also working on an update for the Midland Community Foundation, their website. So a lot of projects going through, and we really appreciate all the collaboration and teamwork going on. Well, Andy, is there any other questions that we can answer?
Nothing else in the chat?
Well, we thank everybody for their time and their interest. We look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for watching this video on our research for the SENT Symposium and SVSU Virtual Student Showcase. And today what we're going to be talking about is an efficient localization for indoor environments using classification algorithms. So in today's technological climate, there's a huge need for indoor locationing-based services, whereas in the past, this data has typically come from the Global Navigation Satellite System, or GNSS for short. But the problem with data from the GNSS is that it works well for outdoor scenarios and doesn't work very well for indoor scenarios. And that's due to reasons such as signal interference, surrounding radio sources, and physical obstructions. So what has industry done thus far to improve upon positioning accuracy? Well, one of the big concepts right now is called Wi-Fi fingerprinting, and it's kind of the one we'll be focusing on today. But if you don't know what it is, basically think of it like this. Let's say we have a square grid, and inside this grid, we have just a bunch of random predetermined coordinates. And I'll draw a little wireless access point down here. But basically at each one of these predetermined coordinates, we want to have a device that transmits a radio signal back and forth between itself and the wireless access points. And this is going to essentially derive an RSS value, or received signal strength, it's just short for that. And then what happens is this RSS value is then paired with the location coordinate here at this point, and that pair then, and forgive my awful attempt at being an artist here, but that pair then of that coordinate and the RSS value is essentially like a key value pair almost. That is then stored in this repository, this RSS repository. So what happens then when an application ends up going live, the RSS values from an actual user's phone then is derived, and then that is mapped to an RSS value in the repository, and then the corresponding coordinate is the estimated location then of that user at a given point in time. So given this information, what are some common issues with Wi-Fi fingerprinting? Obviously, it's going to take a significant amount of time and effort to collect an RSS repository, because if you think about, for example, trying to map out a university campus, it would take a significant amount of data points to be able to accurately represent and model an entire university. Not to mention different platform devices are typically going to produce fluctuating RSS values, because if you consider a iOS Apple smartphone versus some flavor of Android, they're typically going to have different hardware architecture as well as software and operating system architecture as well. And so when it comes to Wi-Fi based fingerprinting, there's basically two different parts. There's the offline phase, which is the part we talked about where you kind of build up that RSS repository. And then there's the online phase where you then take a user's device in real time and map the RSS value coming from their device to an RSS value in the repository and essentially estimate their position by using the corresponding coordinate as their predicted position. And so the two machine learning models that we're using for our experiment are the decision tree and a recurrent neural net. But there's a lot of other models that have been used prior to this, such as the k-nearest neighbor model, which is a bit time inefficient. There's also convolutional neural nets as far as recurrent neural nets. And so we actually are using a variation of the recurrent neural net in this experiment, but typical recurrent neural nets suffer from the vanishing gradient problem, which we'll discuss here in a little bit. But that's why we're actually using a variation called LSTM, or long short-term memory, to help solve this problem. And so why are we comparing a decision tree up against an RNN LSTM? Well, it's been shown in past experiments that the RNN LSTM can actually provide some pretty good positioning accuracy with Wi-Fi based fingerprinting. But in every machine learning application, you're going to see this trend where you want to basically benchmark a computationally complex model, in our case our RNN, against a more baseline model. And then in our case, that would be our decision tree model, because decision trees are pretty representationally simplistic. And so the overarching goal then is, or idea is, that if we get the same or better or even insignificantly less performance from the decision tree as opposed to the RNN, well, then there might be room there for a trade-off where we say, okay, well, let's sacrifice just a slight bit of performance, or even maybe gain some performance for using a visually simplistic model like a decision tree. And you'll, again, that's another trend you'll see a lot, where sometimes you sacrifice performance for representational simplicity. And so for our proposed approach design, what we want to do is basically decrease that variance in fluctuating RSS values. And there's two parts to our experiment. Part one, we input our raw data, we train our models, then we test our models, and then we compute the error. And the error is basically calculated by taking the distance between the actual location of a device and the predicted location by the model. And then we have part two, where the only difference is then we first normalize the raw data set before we go through the training, testing, and computing error process. And so let's kind of take a look here now under the hood of what's going on during all of these different steps. And during the input step, we have 5 different platform devices that we're using. Each platform device is going to produce a trained data set and a test data set. And this is raw data here. We haven't normalized this yet, and this is all being input into MATLAB. And so looking past part one of the experiment briefly, we have in part two, we had that normalization step where we first normalize every data point in the data set before inputting it to the model. The normalization function can be seen below, where basically we're taking the current RSS value, subtracting it from the mean RSS value of the current data set, and then dividing by the standard deviation of all the RSS values of the entire data set, hence reducing the variance in the fluctuating RSS values. And so when we go to construct our decision tree now, we're actually using MATLAB's fitc_tree function with its default training parameters. And so by default, when MATLAB builds decision trees, it uses the standard CART algorithm along with the split criteria of node impurity, so I measure node impurity at each level, and it calculates the node impurity using Gini's diversity index. The max number of splits it allows in a tree is n-1, where n is the number of samples in a data set. So our training set, for example, at 2,000 samples, it would allow a total maximum of 1999 samples total, or splits total rather. And because of that, it tends toward to build deeper trees, which can cause overfitting. But the good thing is that MATLAB actually optimizes its splitting algorithm, and it tends to favor full trees. So sort of avoid that worst case scenario of having a tree that is of depth n-1. And so to get a little bit of a better example of how our decision tree model is actually deciphering and figuring the user's estimated location, let's take a look at this diagram here real quick. And this is a bit of an oversimplified example, but just imagine with me here for a moment that we have this very narrow hallway, and these white lines or walls are the walls of the hallway. And at one end of the hallway, we have a wireless access point here. And these boundaries are representing, at a certain distance away from the wireless access point, what are the RSS values that this wireless access point is transmitting back and forth between itself and a device. So obviously, for example, at the first boundary here, we have an RSS value equal to 2. At the second boundary, it's an RSS value equal to 4. Third boundary is 6, and finally this last boundary here is 8. And so you can see that our device is transmitting an RSS value of 7.5, and we're kind of in this final, in this last area here on our diagram. And so since our RSS value is equal to 7.5 and we're kind of in this boundary space here, our estimated position, or the estimated position of our device, is going to be 1,4. So that final predetermined dot on the diagram. And the reason for that being, let's say we come in here to the decision tree, and based on the rules, we say, okay, is our RSS value that we're transmitting, is it greater than 4? Well, in our case, 7.5. So yes, it is. So we go to the right. Then we say, is our RSS value greater than 6? Yes, it is. So we go to the right again. And that's how we come up with our estimated position of 1.4. You can see then that all of these rules then are sort of relating back to the boundaries here on our diagram. These little green boundaries. Because we have RSS value equals 2, 4, and 6, and that's exactly what the rules in the decision tree are checking for. Now, in the case of our experiment, we had just over 2,000 records with 9 features per record. So things got pretty complicated pretty quickly, and this is just a snapshot of a segment of one of the decision trees that were made during our experiment. And just point being that these decision trees can get pretty complicated and pretty extensive fairly quickly. So now when we go to create our RNN LSTM model, we use MATLAB's train network function. And this time though, we actually modify and we create some custom parameters for the RNN LSTM. The good thing about RNN LSTMs is that they are good on temporally sensitive problem domains. They carry cell state and memory, so they can reference back to earlier time steps and data from earlier time steps. And they also have a carry state thanks to the LSTM variation of an RNN. And remember how we talked about that the LSTM variation kind of helps diminish the vanishing gradient problem. And we'll see that here in just a little bit. And so here's some of the custom model parameters we set for our RNN LSTM, where we put the input size equal to 9, because we have 9 wireless access points, so 9 features. We set the number of hidden units or nodes to 180, the number of classes to 105, since we have 105 predetermined coordinates on our grid. Epochs is set to 300, so the training model will run, or I should say the training data will run 300 times. Our learning rate we set to 0.01, and our optimization function we have set to the atom optimization function. And so in this diagram to the left here, we can kind of see how information moves through these LSTM layers in MATLAB. And the LSTM layers kind of divide the sequential data up into these different time steps. And so the X vertices here are representing the input at every time step, which would be, in our case, our 9 RSS values coming from each wireless access point. And the H vertice here is basically representational of the output every time step. And it's important to note that the output of every time step is actually the input to the next time step. So if we take a look at what's going on under the hood here of one of these LSTM blocks, we can see that we have the output from the last time step being input as the hidden state or input to the current time step. We have the X, which is representational again of the input, so the RSS values of the current time step. And we have this new symbol here that's a C, and what this is basically the carry state. What the carry state does is you can think of it as like a giant conveyor belt that's carrying information to all the time steps from all the previous time steps. And at any moment in time, the current time step can then access this information and kind of help build long-term dependencies and associations with data in earlier time steps. And so what these letters are here are in the middle are just gates. So we have our forget gate and our information gates, and then our output gate here. And basically the responsibility of each of these gates is that the forget gate will basically reset data in the carry state here, so our C, that the LSTM layer no longer deems relevant. The information gates in the middle G and I will add new information that is deemed relevant, and the output gate O will basically control what information from the carry state, so our C, is able to manipulate data in our hidden state H, or our new output data here. I know this all seems very arbitrary, but the important thing to take away from this is that at the end of the day, when all this information makes it through to the end of our LSTM layer, this final state is just going to be basically a bunch of probabilities that are representational of the probability that a user is at a certain location of one of our predefined classes, meaning our coordinates in this case. And so during our test step now, we were able to input our test data sets into each model, both the decision tree and RNN LSTM, to allow them to make predictions then on all the samples in our test data set using the predict function for the decision tree model and the classify function for the RNN LSTM model. And so now finally we come to the step of calculating the error in our prediction, or I should say the prediction of our models. And we do that by using the Euclidean distance formula. So basically what we're doing is we're trying to find the distance between the predicted location we thought the user was at and the actual location that they're at. And then ultimately what we do is we end up adding up all of these errors amongst all the different test runs and then averaging them to get the average error of each model. And that's done individually for part 1 and part 2 of the experiment. And so part 1 of the experiment, we can see that our decision tree model greatly underperformed our RNN LSTM model, since the average error for the decision tree was about 3.715, whereas for the RNN LSTM was about 2.3355. And you can see below here the scores of each test run. So we basically ran each test set with each training set in both models. This is just a better way to sort of visualize the error rates for each model in part one. And don't let this deceive you, because you have to think here, the scale of our decision tree model here of the graph is much greater than it is here. So at first glance, it looks like our decision tree outperformed our RNN LSTM by a long shot, but that's actually not the case. And so in part two then, when we first normalized the data, you can see that then our decision tree actually had a much better performance actually than our RNN LSTM model did. And again, we've displayed the scores here below. Now here the scales are a little bit more similar, so it's a little bit harder to sort of misinterpret this, but just another way again to visualize the error rates for each model. So we saw in part one of the experiment that our decision tree model was actually greatly outperformed by the RNN LSTM model. This really comes as no surprise, seeing as decision trees do not do well when there's a high variance in data, and seeing as we didn't normalize the RSS value data sets in part one, there's really no wonder why our decision tree model underperformed so much. Okay, so then in part two, we did normalize the data, and our decision tree did in fact outperform our RNN LSTM. So at this point, we need to question, how could something as computationally complex as an RNN LSTM be outperformed by such a simplistic model as a decision tree? Well, computational complexity does not always tell you the whole story. When it comes to machine learning, you don't build models to generalize well to every problem domain. You actually engineer models to solve a particular problem. So RNN LSTMs do perform well in sequential data, but more so when there's like a global dependency of the data, where local data, or I should say recent data, matters more than data from a long time ago in the past. So if you think about trying to predict a yearly cycle of temperatures and you want to know what the temperatures are going to be for the next week, well, if you input data where the last 3 weeks have been trending warmer, but 3 months ago it was below freezing, your RNN LSTM can pick up on patterns and realize that, okay, 3 months ago temperatures were sub-zero and the last 3 weeks have been trending upwards, meaning warmer. So I can only assume then that it's, spring or summer, and I can assume then that the weekly forecast is going to be trending warmer as well. Whereas in the case of our experiment, we have situations like this where we have our coordinates that are staying relatively constant on the x-axis but trending downwards on the y-axis towards 0, and all of a sudden it skips over here to where x equals 15. So in this case, our recent data really won't matter as much to predict this, because it's a totally different, I should say that from time step to time step between these two, it really won't gain the RNN LSTM much information. So it's variances like that can break patterns in RNN LSTMs. And so another thing to consider too is that MATLAB does in fact optimize, or at least tries to optimize, its decision tree algorithm as much as possible by favoring full trees, which can kind of help eliminate that worst case scenario of having n-1 depth for its classification trees. And so in conclusion, we can say then that if there's no sense of normalization, or there's a large fluctuation in RSS values, a decision tree model probably won't be the most reliable model when implementing with Wi-Fi fingerprinting. But on the other hand, if data is first normalized to where we can reduce that high variance in data, then a decision tree absolutely can be considered a reliable model. And here we have jotted down just a couple things that could be done, actions that could be taken to extend this experiment in the future, such as increasing data set size, reconfiguring some of the training parameters, and also creating hybrid approaches, like combining a convolutional neural network and a RNN LSTM. And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thanks to Dr. Aus for his guidance on this research, and also thank you to the SE&T Symposium, SVSU Virtual Student Showcase for the opportunity to present our research today. Thank you.
Hey everyone, fortunately we don't have time for your Q&A because our video ran a little over, but I just wanted to say thank you to SVSU for giving us this opportunity to present our work today, and also thanks to Dr. Aus for being a great mentor. This was my first exposure to machine learning, and so it was quite a journey going through the ropes and figuring everything out and putting this entire project together, so thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Makaya Tunstall, and I am here to briefly talk about the research conducted by myself, Allison Booms, Brianna Vanderstelt, and our principal investigator, Dr. Travis Paschik. This research is titled Trauma Resilience on Campus, the Moderating Effect of Developmental Assets on Trauma Exposure and Symptomatology. This research involved the evaluation of the College Assets Measurement Profile for undergraduate students, also known as Campus, which is a recently devised assessment measure for resilience indicators in university-enrolled emerging adults. Emerging adults were the target population for this study due to the many unfamiliar challenges they face, the instability, and the demographic shifting, which may all have an effect on their coping skills. It is important to note that many of the emerging adults in the sample experienced one or more traumatic events, and they all varied greatly in their severity and in the type of trauma exposure. Following our analysis, which was done using Andrew Hayes' SPSS macros, we found that the global asset scores on the campus instrument statistically significantly moderated or buffered the correlation between trauma exposure and symptomology. You can see this moderating effect in Figure 1, and in Figure 2, you can see that with low global asset scores, there was a higher symptomatology following trauma exposure, and as global asset scores increase, symptomatology decreased following trauma exposure. The campus framework has previously been found to be both reliable and valid. The use of this framework can help to effectively gauge which students may be at risk for adverse outcomes and post-traumatic symptomatology following trauma and hardships. With the implementation of this framework, on college campuses, counselors, therapists, and even professors may be able to actively increase developmental assets in their students and increase their chances for resilience. Thank you.